Well, welcome everybody. I'm Melissa Rosenberg with the Autism Society of Maryland. Thank you for joining us today for our third session of Self-Love for Self-Advocates. This is a series of 4 webinars. We have one more in January that explore the importance of self-love and self-understanding for autistic self-advocates who experience loneliness and isolation. Led by Steven Isaacson, himself a person with autism. These sessions have been a mix of engaging presentations and reflections that feature autistic speakers and panelists. The goal of the series is to share tools and perspectives from past challenges and help participants chart a path forward for their lives. So before we get started, I wanted to share that we are offering simultaneous interpretation in Spanish. We're going to remain together for a welcome and some instructions. And I'd like to ask Magda Castro-Lewis from Alma Hispanic Consulting and Translation Services to give us some instruction on how this works. Magda?
Okay, Melissa, thank you so much. Buenas tardes a todos. Yo soy Magdalena Castro Lúez, cofundadora de ALMA, Servicios de Traducción e Interpretación. Bienvenidos al seminario de hoy titulado Self-Love, acogiendo la neurodiversidad y conozcamos nuestro cerebro. A las personas que desean escuchar la presentación en español, lo pueden hacer yendo a la parte de abajo de la pantalla, hacen clic en el globo y escogen la opción que dice español. O también pueden ir a los 3 puntos que están también en la parte de abajo y escoger la opción de español. También quiero recordarles a los participantes que mantengan sus micrófonos en silencio y las cámaras apagadas para evitar interferencias en la presentación y la grabación. Si tienen preguntas, pueden hacerlas en el chat del Zoom y al final serán contestadas. Ahora los dejo con Silvia Maldonado, quien va a hacer la interpretación simultánea del seminario. Gracias. Melissa.
Thank you, Magda. We are recording tonight's session, and in a few days, we'll be sharing the recording and a copy of Steven's slides with you. So now I'd like to introduce our speaker for the evening, Steven Isaacson. LMSW works as a senior group facilitator for DC Peers. He's a job coach by training and enjoys working with folks on the spectrum in community-based settings. He recently earned his master's degree in social work from the University of Maryland, Baltimore. When he's not working, Steven is tending to his plants, camping, hiking, and pet sitting. Steven is on the autism spectrum. Welcome, Steven.
Thank you, Melissa. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Not good morning, good evening. It is 7 o'clock in the evening, not the morning. Hope everyone's having a great day and a good week so far. Thanks for joining us for session 3 of the Self-Love series for self-advocates. Today we'll be talking about neurodiversity and getting to know our brains a little bit and how we work in different environments. So thank you all for being here. Today will be an interactive presentation, so we'll be taking some polls and we'll be getting some audience feedback as well. So keep your phone with you or some device that you can participate, and we'll put some results for the voting on the screen so we can get a sense of what people are thinking. Today is part 3 of a 4-part series. The next and last session will be in January. Today we'll be talking about neurodiversity. And the first 2 parts, we talked about loneliness and isolation, what it is and how it affects autistic people. Last time we talked about how to make online friends and friends in general, but autistic people tend to appreciate making friends in a virtual or online capacity. And so we had a panel of autistic people who have experience making friends online, and that was very informative and is available on the internet. And then, of course, in January, after this session, we'll be talking about kind of putting all this into practice and what it looks like to actually get out there and try new things, meet new people, and sort of break out of some of the loneliness and isolation that we've talked about, and put some of these skills to the test, and hopefully get some folks some ideas about how to move forward. So we'll start today talking about neurodiversity. And right off the bat, wanted to put this poll out there. The question I posed to the folks in the audience is, what does neurodiversity mean to you? So you might have heard this term, neurodiversity, in the media or on TV and around social circles. So I want you to pull out your phone, go to slido.com, and type in that number, or you can do this QR code here. And while you have that QR code, I'm going to also pull it up here. Oh, I don't know if you can still see that. Screen sharing, so I might have to share my whole screen. So let's see here if I stop sharing. Do the whole window. And then move that. Okay. Yes, so here we go. So you still have the QR code if you still need that. Oops, that is not what I was looking for. We're looking for the neurodiversity one. Sorry about that. Present in full screen. There we go. Okay, we're on the right poll. So the question is, what does neurodiversity mean to you? And you'll use the same number and QR code for all three. And if you don't want to use the QR code, you can always put your answer in the chat and Melissa might be able to read it. And I like doing these interactive polls because it gets people thinking about their own, personal answer, and then seeing what other people write as well. So we have inclusiveness. What does neurodiversity mean to you? We also have thinking differently.
Thinking differently from some is also in the chat.
Yep. So being inclusive of different ways of thinking. This term neurodiversity is relatively new. Of course, autistic people and people who think differently are not new. But the way that we conceptualize and think about different brain wiring, like we have here, different wiring than typical. This is fairly new within the past 30 years or so. Okay, so we got some good answers. Thank you everybody for participating. I think we might have one more person thinking about what they might want to say. Okay, oh, there we go. So we have individuality. Right, so the diversity of how our brains are made up, that makes us more individualized. Also, a range of how our brains work. Yeah, so the diversity of, the difference of how our brains work. So we have some pretty good knowledge so far. Thanks everyone for participating. I'm going to skip back to our presentation. All right, do we have someone in the waiting room? Yes, we do. All right. So we just did a Slido on what is neurodiversity. We got some feedback from the audience. We have some previous knowledge already, which is great. Essentially, my definition is the natural variation in how our brains work. Some people said different wiring, the way that kind of our brain processes things, the world, and each other. When we have social communication, how we process the sensory world. We'll talk about all that. And we also talked about how, these differences make us unique. They make us who we are. And that's something to be celebrated. Um, and the neurodivergent community is different from the neurotypical community, which makes up the majority of people who we consider, quote unquote, normal development, typical development. Um, and so you see a lot of these things even in children, but especially as they grow up to be adults, people process the world very differently. And we'll talk about later about how this gives us some strengths, even though we might need some supports as well. I'm not going to do that. Okay. This is my cat, Ollie. He might join us. So we conceptualize the autism spectrum sometimes like a line, right? Where someone is more autistic or they're less autistic. Where are you on the spectrum? We think of it in terms of functioning labels. Someone's high or low functioning. But really, in my view, especially as a social worker, I see how people can really change based on environment and the supports that they have or don't have. People can really change what their abilities are, what the skills they have, depending on where they are and who's around. I see that in myself all the time. I do well in some environments and not others. We'll totally talk about that as well, especially when we're thinking about isolation and loneliness. What environments would we do well in and where do we start? And so we see this chart on the right. It's a circle cut into different sections, and it has all different categories to it. I really like this conception of quote unquote autism spectrum because people have different profiles in different areas, right? So I might be very fidgety. I have two fidgets with me to help me present today. Right, I might have a certain level of fidgetiness, I would say, somewhere around here. Noise sensitivity, social difficulty, anxiety, right? So we might all look different given on different sections. And it might even be good to find this chart on your own time and chart out kind of where you see yourself on all of these areas. Do you make eye contact? Do you see yourself, either as anxious or depressed or sad? This is, I think, more of a comprehensive view of the autism spectrum. This gives you, especially as a clinician or someone who you want to know more about somebody, this gives you a whole complete picture about someone's profile, as opposed to the line, which is sort of a linear, yes or no, more or less framework. So that's kind of how we're framing our talk today. But you can also think about charting your own profile on here and seeing maybe where you land. It was really interesting when I was making this particular slide about learning disabilities. I was looking for pictures, and this is the one that I think looked the most neutral. There was a lot of pictures about kids looking very frustrated. And I almost added them just to prove the point that when you're looking for pictures or news about learning disabilities, you see a lot of deficit-based language. You see a lot of information about what kids or adults can't do. Um, and I think what we're learning too, especially when we talk to people with learning disabilities, is that it's really just a different way of processing and learning. We'll talk about learning styles later, but especially in academics, people kind of get messaging and self-imagery about what they're able to do based on how they did in school. And if you're being taught in a way that doesn't work for your brain, or you're being assessed, or you're taking a test in a way that doesn't work for you, it can be really hard to kind of seem smart, or think of yourself as intelligent. People with dyslexia kind of mix up numbers and letters. So you might need to like check their Excel spreadsheet, but they can still be very, very productive and welcoming additions to a work team. Or they can be very good friends. They're very creative. There are some people with dyslexia who have great personalities, but in terms of doing math or some of these other academic things, they just might need some more support, and that's nothing to be ashamed of. Of course, when we need support, they also come with strengths, right? So some people with learning disabilities or other cognitive disabilities or learning differences, they might have really good interpersonal skills, right? So they could really read people because they've learned sort of how people treat them throughout their life based on their disability. So they're a really good judgment of character. They are really good with creativity, and they find interesting ways to solve problems. And so when we think about adding teams or friend groups, having that diversity of thinking and personality can really help. So as we talk about neurodiversity, we'll break it down into 4 categories. We'll go on a little bit of a journey. First, we'll talk about sensory processing. We'll also talk about communication styles. We'll talk about learning styles. And then we'll talk about, towards the end, around executive functioning. And if there's any questions or comments, you can feel free to add them to the chat, and Melissa can stop me and we can talk about them. We'll also have a Q&A at the end. And don't forget to keep your phone handy because we're going to keep doing those Slidos, those polls. So to start out, what's your sensory profile like? Similar to that, remember that circle with all those different lines on it where we talked about, being fidgety, being depressed, anxious. We can also talk about that for our sensory profile, right? So, are you more of a sight person? Are you more impacted by changes in lighting? Sometimes when you're in a room, the lighting can be very harsh. Right now, my face might look bright. It's because I have a mushroom lamp right here. I also enjoy lots of natural light. And so in some sort of more traditional buildings with classrooms and stuff, you might find overhead lighting, which can be sometimes harmful to the processing of autistic people. A lot of people sometimes feel pain from that if they can't get away from it. The way that the brain processes, sometimes they can even hear the hums of the light, which is very interesting. I'm not sure we have a lot of research on that, and I think that's an area that we could really use community-based methods to talk about. What's your experience with that? The processing from sound, a lot of people, especially myself, sirens are not a huge favorite. Hearing like loud noises, especially all of a sudden, um, can be very jarring. Barking dogs isn't a favorite sound of mine, but of course, dogs are still very cute, so sometimes I put up with it. But a dog bark out of nowhere can sort of startle me sometimes. Textures, right? So touch can be a one. I think a lot of autistic people, you need to ask them before you touch them because it could be very jarring, especially out of nowhere. For me, I really like specific textures. And so that could also be a fidget, right? If you find a texture that you like, using that to help you through a struggling situation can be, if you have to make a phone call that you really don't want to make, or if you have to make an appointment, doing those things you need to do, but finding the supports that you need can really help you achieve your goals. And that can come from understanding your brain and really what you need in that moment. Tastes, some people have food aversions to specific textures from food. I think, a lot of people talk about that. Some, even neurotypicals, right, still sometimes don't like certain foods. So I think that's just kind of part of the human experience, how our body processes food. Certain smells, right? I think a lot of autistic communities, autistic friendly events have sort of a no perfume or no cologne rule, right? Because you never know what someone's going to be set off by. You don't know kind of what people like or don't like. And so sometimes to avoid all that, especially when you're with people who are sensitive to smells, it's usually best to just not wear that. Um, there's also these other ones called proprioception, which is a sort of how you're aware of your body in space, right? So a lot of people can be clumsy or falling. I'm not too familiar with this one. Um, but you know, I think a lot of people sometimes miss that this is a thing, and this is one of those senses that definitely we need more research on. But it's really kind of like how you like position yourself in different areas and how you're aware of yourself in a certain situation, and it can be very dangerous because if you're trying to go into the community and you're not sure, you know, you have some issues with this, it can be dangerous if you're not seeing the gap somewhere and you might fall, and that can really ruin your day. Interoception is also interesting. It's basically aware of the internal body cues. So some people miss those cues for going to the bathroom and other things. It's also can be related to food. And so these are different sensory areas that impact autistic people, and some things that we should be aware of with our own profiles. Um, there's also an idea about sensory seeking versus sensory avoidance. And so the idea here is, are you someone who needs sort of more, you know, so are you someone who needs to fidget and feel that thing? Or are you someone who, you know, too much is too much, right? And sometimes you just need to hide under a weighted blanket, which is totally understood. Those are different profiles, I think, categories in the autistic experience that we can point to as well. So feel free to open up your phone again, and we will talk about what senses you're most sensitive to. We'll go to Slido again. So I'm going to open that one up here. Whoops. I'm going to share my screen again. We're going to do learning style this time. We're going to present. I think we might have had a couple responses already. And of course, if you have multiple, you can feel free to write those down as well. So the question is, what is your learning style? And we have a few people who say visual. You can also be visual and something else as well. This is something that's really interesting too, when you're getting verbal instructions, but you really need to look at it on paper. That can be tough too.
We've got one in the chat that says visual and kinesthetic.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll get to that. A lot of people have multiple ways of learning, which is totally okay. All right, so I think we got our responses. So a lot of visual folks here. That's pretty cool. We got a fourth visual one.
We had one more in the chat that said sometimes audio.
Okay. Yeah, we'll talk about that as well. It's really important when you're designing programs or when you're designing different things to try and be as inclusive as possible. And the way that you do this in this instance is sharing information in multiple formats. So if you're sharing data or something, you have a graph, right? Which can be visual. You kind of see the bars or the lines, but then you also might share the numbers. So you kind of have the numbers sort of in a reading way, right? You read the numbers, but you can also orient the numbers in a graph form, which is a visual way. So, okay, we got a lot of visual people here. Good to know. Sometimes audio, yeah. All right, gonna stop. I guess I can go right back to my thing here. Oops. Where did it go? Oh, Zoom. Nope. All right, stop share. There we go. Sorry about my background. All right. Oops. Oh, senses. Oh, that was the wrong question. We did learning styles. Okay, well, we can do this one too. So senses, I guess, sorry, they're out of order. But we can do this one too. So that's good to know. And then go back to Slido and we're going to answer this one. So we're going to do two in a row here. The question is, what senses are you most sensitive to? So we thought about learning styles and we learned a little bit about that. And now we'll think about what we were just talking about in terms of sensory. What senses are you most sensitive to? So the options here are sound, light, smell, taste, and touch. And I think maybe it only lets you choose one, but of course there are multiple. And if you'd like, you can put those in the chat too. Looks like we have sound. A lot of people are sensitive to sound. That's pretty common. We have one in the chat.
That touch, especially in crowds.
Yeah, definitely. Having sort of like close quarters, feeling compact, makes me a little panicky sometimes. Okay, so interesting that people aren't that sensitive to smell or light. The light one is actually very common. Light and sound are the two of the more common ones. But of course, we have only a certain number of people here and we don't have the whole population. But okay, that's good to know. So yeah, a lot of people here are sensitive to sound. That's good to know. Um, and then followed by touch, taste, smell, and light, or light and smell. So that's really good to know. Think about as we go through this presentation, what sort of environments do you do well in? And is it because of how it interacts with your sensory processing? You know, so if you are sensitive to sound, and then you think about where's your happy place, is it because it isn't that loud? Or is it because you like the sounds? You know, do you not like going to live music? It could be because it's really loud, especially if you stand right in front of the monitors, have the music blasting at you. And then this begins to all make sense and we can learn about ourselves a little bit. All right, so we're going to move along. Thanks for bearing with me with the change in question. So we're going to move on to learning about what communities are good for us. And I paired this with sensory because we're also thinking about friends. And I give the advice that, you know, you shouldn't make any old friend, right? The people who are good for us are not always the first friends we meet. And there's some ways we can tell. And one way we can tell is if they don't match our sensory needs. And I think it's okay for everyone to have different sensory needs or for things to not match immediately. But if you know, are the best self-advocate and you say, hey, you know, I really need this in terms of communication styles or places they want to go, you know, for example, if you really don't like concerts because of the sound, but all the friends that you've made really want to go see concerts. Are they willing to be flexible? You know, maybe not this time, maybe we go to the concert some other time, or maybe they go with somebody else. But the communities that are good for us are usually the ones that are more adaptive to our needs. And it's really a two-way street too. So friends are adaptive to each other. You know, we meet each other in the middle. Um, and so if you, I guess the first step is for you to know what your needs are. And so thinking about your sensory profile as well, you know, what situations are you doing well in, what situations do you not do well in, and then communicating that to the people you're with. Um, other activities could be around sitting and talking communication, right? Some people love the coffee chats. Some people like to move around, and that's totally okay. But then again, you know, are you with people who are willing to be flexible? And so are you willing to maybe, you know, if you like being in nature, maybe you can go on a nature walk one time, and then maybe you can go to the coffee shop another time. Um, and I think being with people who understand and accept you for who you are and for your friendship really matters. And the people who are good for us are going to be the ones that are willing to compromise and be flexible with our needs. Um, and another way you can tell is just kind of by listening to your instincts, trusting your gut. So if you get a feeling when you're with these people that something's not right here, listen to that gut feeling. It's usually leading us in a direction that we should listen to. Um, think about how you feel with people who make you really happy, and then compare that to a group of people you might be with who, just trusting that that gut instinct. Is this a group that's good for me? Are they going to help me meet my goals? Do they really listen to me? Do I trust them? Um, and this kind of goes around to like when you go out into the community to combat loneliness and isolation, um, what do you do? When you're in the community, like what kind of activities do you do? Do you do them by yourself? Do you do them with people? And finding a group of people who understands neurodiversity, is willing to listen and learn about your sensory profile can really go a long way to helping us feel happy and comfortable in ourselves. I believe very strongly that people with disabilities and those who are autistic or neurodivergent have a right to be in the community. We have a right to patronize businesses, go out to eat, spend friend time, do all the things that neurotypicals like to do. Um, but I think also part of the self-love piece is making sure that we know where we're going and what we're getting ourselves into. Um, we want to have the best time possible. And so considering, where we're going and what it's going to be like, we like predictability as folks on the spectrum. And so maybe calling ahead, asking, the person at the desk, what's the vibe or what is it like, what should I expect if I come at this time or that time? If you're going out to eat, a lot of places have, depending on the acoustics, a lot of restaurants can be really loud. It can be hard to hear someone or listen to the person you're with. Um, so considering going around, 4 or 5 o'clock if you're going for dinner, if it's going to be a bit quieter, maybe going later in the day, especially on a weekend, can be really loud. And so if sound is one of your sensory considerations, maybe one of those questions you would ask is, at what hours is it quieter? Um, if you don't like being around a lot of people, I know that with COVID, the social distancing has really been kind of in our thoughts. If you're worried about a lot of people, if you need to go to the gym or you want to exercise, another example is that, it gets busier around 5 o'clock after people get off work. And so considering going at different hours, maybe earlier in the day or later at night. So thinking about kind of how we make these workarounds for ourselves so that we can meet our goals and have the best time possible. I'm gonna stop because I saw something in the chat. So crowds is part of touch and not visual. Um, it could be both. So this question was from Marcos. It could definitely be both. Um, I would say if you're kind of in a small, compact area, having crowds, it could be people kind of brushing on your elbows or something. Um, but I think you're right. It could also be visual because if you kind of like open a door and you see a wide crowd of people, like, oh my gosh, that's one of the most overwhelming things for me, is to go into a room and see a bunch of people, and I feel like they're all staring at me. So I think you're right. It could definitely be visual as well um, as well as touch, just depending on the space. Um, And so, yeah, a lot of these different sensory considerations can really be part of both. So we see this with communication styles, learning styles. A lot of these things don't really fit neatly into one box, right? It might be something that is taken by multiple categories. So considering that, when you're making your plan. Um,
You have
I have
another question. I don't know if you want to hold off or you want to take them as they come.
I'll finish the slide and then I'll
Okay.
take the question.
Perfect.
So the other thing is I have my water bottle right here with me. I know that as I talk, I'm gonna probably want some water. So thinking about if you're going out, where are you going? What are you bringing with you? Um, when's the next time you're gonna be back home? This gets to a little bit of the executive functioning that we can talk about later. Um, but bringing the stuff that you need ahead of time can really help you have the best time possible during your day. I bring headphones, I bring a book, water bottle. I almost like never read the book, but it's like just really nice to know that I have that. If I need to kind of tuck away for a second and put my head in a book, I can do that. Or if I have some downtime and I don't want to be on my phone, I can read a book or something. The only thing I would say is if you're going to a concert or if you're going to an area, especially on the plane with security, well, that's a typo. Just make sure that you know what's in your bag and you're following all the rules and you get through security okay. We have another question here. In the previous slide about community, what did you say about things we like to do by ourselves? Um, I'm not too sure. Camille, if you want to come off mute, do you want to ask that question?
Um, yeah, I was just asking, clarification. I think you were saying something about like paying attention to the things that we like to do by ourselves compared to like with other people. I was not sure I understood if that's what you said.
Oh, sure. So the first session we had was on loneliness and isolation. And we were talking about those ideas with the autistic community. And so now we're talking a little bit about, what would it look like if we went out and got to know people, made some friends. And so knowing the expectations of what are those friends going to want to do? Like what kind of, do they have a sensory profile? Um, kind of being on the same page about what sort of activities, are you going to go hiking? Or, oh, I don't like hiking that much. Like this person was expecting to do a lot of physical activity. Well, I don't really like that. It can definitely be something that you do by yourself too. Having alone time is very healthy and learning to do things by yourself is also very healthy. But in the context of loneliness and isolation, if there's people who are learning, or if there's people who want to get to know more people, um, it's good to know sort of like what goals you guys have. Are you guys both do you have sensory profiles that match or don't match? So it's good to have that conversation beforehand. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Of course. All right. So now we're heading into communication. And just like learning styles, we also have communication styles. And we communicate primarily in 3 or 4 different ways. Some people are assertive, right? So they can be clear or direct. They can also be respectful. So just because you're assertive doesn't mean you're mean. You're asserting yourself. You're being confident in what you're saying. This is usually well, it doesn't have to be fact driven, but oftentimes it is or it can be. Um, there's also aggressive styles that could be hostile or confrontational. And these types of people tend to put themselves first. It's very interesting too, the idea that we can change communication styles based on who we're around or what environment we're in. So I think a lot about food service. And when people are hungry and they're coming to you to order food, sometimes people can be aggressive because they're hungry and they put themselves first and they're confrontational and say, "Where's my food? Why isn't my food ready?" That's an example of, aggressive. Um, Oftentimes, if we're asserting ourselves, we're ordering food, right? So we're clear, I want this. I want this kind of food. But just because you're assertive doesn't mean you're mean. So you can still be respectful in that way. On the other side of aggressive, you have passive, which can be more avoidant and indirect. So they might say the same thing, but they'll do it they'll circumvent kind of what they're trying to say. And they'll put others' feelings first over themselves. And of course, you've heard of passive aggressive. So it's kind of a combination of those two. But we all have different communication styles and they develop over time. And it's good to know kind of what yours is in relation to other people's. And so if there's a communication difference, it could be you're having a difference in what you're saying or how you're saying it. And of course, this goes, this is true in sort of all contexts. We see this in relationships, we see this in the workplace. A manager could give you an assignment and they could be assertive about giving you a deadline and all this stuff, or they could be passive. And autistic people in the workplace tend to have direct communication styles. Overall, of course, it's not a blanket statement, but if there's directions that are being given in a passive way, it's not always a good idea because you have to get all the information you need. We also have analytical styles, right? So these people communicate through data and facts, and they can be logical, and they tend to value accuracy, right? On the other hand, you can have someone who communicates expressively through emotions and storytelling. And then, of course, you also have relational communication styles, which I think maybe is part of mine. I like to build connections. I tend to have empathy, and I'm relationships based, so I like to see kind of who is kind of in the network and who knows who. It's sort of how I relate to the world. I think it's something I've always done, but I've also, um, you know, tended to also be more expressive. I talk, through sort of emotions and I build my experience or evidence based on stories, because I think people have interesting stories to share. And so some of these differences or conflicts can come when you're talking with somebody of a different communication style and you haven't really talked about it yet. Um, like if you just meet a new friend, it can really kind of rub you the wrong way if they don't get, your point of view, or if you don't like the way they say something. It could be that you just have different communication styles, and that's worth a conversation. Okay, so we'll get into learning styles a little bit. And as you heard from the last Slido, um, we have a lot of visual learners here. I think someone also said kinesthetic learners. We'll talk about that. And as I said before, I think a lot of people in school sometimes are tested for what they know in a way that doesn't fit their style. And it's not like a style, like clothing style. It's a the way you process the world, the way you get information is different depending on how your brain works. So that's part of neurodiversity. I think we need a lot more um, discussion sort of in the public about this. But the way to make something more inclusive is to share information in various formats. And so we can see this, that people with visual learning styles, they like seeing charts. So they like the graphs, pictures, videos, and other visual aids. This can be like calendars or other planning devices. And then the reading, right? So that would be, so if the visual is your chart or your graph, the reading would be like seeing the numbers. Um, and that would be stuff like books or articles, or if you are trying to like listen to a professor or a lecture, you would write down notes and then you'd go back through your notes and you'd read them. So reading and writing can be a one learning style. But of course, if you're uh, going through a lecture and you're trying to listen and write at the same time, sometimes that doesn't work. So that's why, as an accommodation, some people have note takers. You can also potentially record lectures so you can go back and listen to them. A lot of people like podcasts. Um, and that's interesting too, because you can hear that discussion over time on a certain topic. And you can really dive deeply into a certain topic with a podcast. It's nice to hear their voices. It's nice to kind of have that back and forth to get that information. And then kinesthetic learning is learning by doing. It's a hands-on type of style, and you basically have to do stuff to learn what to do or what not to do in the future. So, some science is like this, when you're actually doing the experiment and you are feeling what it's like to be in the lab, and how much pressure to put on, one instrument or another. And so actually, it gets very difficult to just be told um, to kick the ball, kick the ball into the goal. Well, how hard do I kick it? Where's the wind going? How big is the ball? And so you might need to kick the ball a few times to figure out, how's the grass feeling today? That's a learning by doing. So if you kick the ball 3 times, by the third time, you're going to get a better feel for everything, and you're probably going to feel better about your ability to make an accurate kick than you did on the first one. And so knowing your style, right, knowing how your brain works in this way can really help you with your ability to learn and process information. So we talked about that. We had that. So we're going to skip that. We did that already. And we're also going to talk about executive functioning. So we talked a little bit about it already. A lot of folks on the spectrum tend to have struggles with executive functioning. And this can also be amplified by other conditions like ADHD. And so for me, my mom used to tell me, clean my room, right? Well, like, oh my gosh, clean my room. Where do I start? You know, that's a multi-step process. And then of course, when I finally get into like all of my stuff, like, and then I sit there and I have like little piles around and I am looking at all my things and I'm like, oh man, I remember that. Like, oh, and I feel these things, like I feel the memories. Remember all the feelings I had with this stuff. And then like an hour goes by and I haven't cleaned anything. So it's like sometimes starting tasks is really hard, but then like keeping the momentum going can also be really difficult for folks on the spectrum. We see that executive function includes setting goals, right? Prioritizing the tasks. And that's a different part of our brain than the processing. Um, I'll leave that for the neuroscientists, but you have different parts of your brain that process, that are in charge of different stuff. And the executive functioning is the part of your brain that really helps you with that like higher order thinking. So it's not so much the survival, right? The survival is like more kind of primitive, like animalistic. The executive functioning is like, okay, I have 5 things to do. How am I going to organize them and prioritize them? That's a higher order type of thinking. And it can be struggle. It can be a struggle sometimes. What should be a priority? What value does each stuff have, and what should be a higher value than others. Setting goals can be tough because you never know what's going to happen in the future. And so we tend to overthink some of this, and especially with sometimes a failure mindset, if you don't meet your goal, then it feels really bad. And so having some of that support, maybe having a friend you trust or a family member, can really help you with some of that. Executive functioning also includes memory. So the ability to follow instructions, especially if they're multi-step. An example of this is sometimes I've gone to the hospital, to visit somebody or to get to a room, and I'm like, I'm looking for this room, in the part of Shrek, in the tallest room in the tallest tower, and they say, oh, just take the right and then take the second elevator, take a right, and you'll see the second set of doors, take a left through those doors. And I'm still stuck on like where am I going? It can be really, really hard to follow auditory instructions. And so that's how you see the combination of all of this, in neurodiversity, the bit of learning style, right? With the executive functioning. So how do I integrate what I'm hearing, processing it, and then putting an action towards it? That can be really, really tough. So something like that would be like, hey, do you have a map for me to use? And then can you point out, where I'm going with like a highlighter? That could be an example of an accommodation. Also, executive functioning includes changes in routine. So adapting to changes can be really tough for folks on the spectrum. And any changes or breaks in routine, COVID really got us with this. We weren't seeing the same people, we weren't going to the same places. And so we had to sort of rebuild our routines. Sometimes we have rigid thinking. I have some of this too, where I kind of get so bogged down in the details that I don't think about the overarching goals or objectives, and that can be hard for me to adapt to change in that way. And then we talked a little bit about starting tasks, right, with the cleaning of the room, but it also includes attention. And sometimes we don't start tasks for various things. I think a lot of times historically we thought about this as attention, like you just have to focus. But sometimes there's other reasons for why things don't get done, and sometimes it can just feel really overwhelming to get started. Where do you start with this? It seems like such a huge thing. And so something like job coaches in the workplace can really help you break down those tasks into manageable chunks. All is that to say that these challenges, can really hold us back from different opportunities. But if you know yourself and you are able to get the support you need, these are typically able to be managed and supported, and you're able to find the opportunities and succeed. I would also add too, just before we skip to accommodations, tying this back to loneliness and isolation. Sometimes if you were to make plans with people, right? See, does this? Yeah, so either memory, so you're remembering plans, or prioritizing tasks. Sometimes we really want to make friends or go out and do something, but we feel like we have other things that are more important. Or also sometimes um, following, like remembering that we had those plans, that can get in the way sometimes of socializing and maintaining relationships. Starting tasks also, like how would you go about asking someone to be your friend, right? Or where would you go to find people to talk to? Those can all be really hard. But knowing yourself and knowing sort of the style of which you process the world can really give you some understanding on how you go about this. Okay. So we talked about accommodations a little bit, but the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act in the 1990s, was enacted, and it protects your right to reasonable accommodations in the workplace and the right to accessible places in public. When we think about accommodations, they can really help us in very profound ways. Some people have been using accommodations their whole life. Some people are new to them. But I think we think about accommodations as something that you have to request, or you have to, it's a whole big thing. But really, a lot of them can be free or low cost. And also some of them can be just the product of a change in mindset, right? So think about that sort of as we look to make friends and meet new people and kind of get out there into the community. Um, Kind of changing our mindset, shifting our mindset a bit. Oh, I can't go there because it's too loud, or oh, I can't go there because of X, Y, and Z issue. Are you able to kind of shift your mindset like, oh, maybe I'll just make a shift here. Maybe I'll bring headphones, or maybe I would just go at a different time. Is there something that you actually need, an actual aid or support, someone to go with you? These can all be questions that you consider. And of course, accommodations help us with, our learning or communication styles. And you'll see I matched some of them here. So I talked about the calendar earlier. So that can help us with the visual learning style. Like, oh, okay, you have the whole month. You can visualize the whole month, and that a week looks like, one chunk down. Oh, okay, got it. I see how far that day is. How do you support a reading learning style? Well, I have so many sticky notes. My joke is that my sticky notes have sticky notes. I'm single-handedly keeping Post-it notes in business. I mean, they're just everywhere. Is that the most effective? Well, it'll be remain to be seen. But that's the thing that helps support me in the moment. If I have something to write down, I gotta write it down, or else it's lost forever. And then I like to kind of see lists. A lot of people have this with shopping lists, right? But then what other kind of lists do you have? Listing your priorities for your goals. You can put stars next to things, you make them bigger. You could also maybe do that on a Word document or some other program that can help you kind of visualize how things relate to each other. And then we just have the good old alarm clock. I mean, gosh, if I didn't get up for my 9 a.m. classes, the auditory just, oh, okay, gets you right up. Well, What if you just like, hit the alarm and you go back to sleep? The auditory doesn't help that much because you turn it off to get the sound off. There's other things called puzzle. You can actually do like a math. I've seen of this like it's a math problem. You have to solve like a problem to get the alarm to go off, and by that time you're already out of bed. And that would be like a learning by doing, a kinesthetic style. And so these all kind of work on different issues or challenges, but they're just examples of ways that you can match them to your learning style. And along with that sort of circle with the different domains at the beginning of the presentation, you can do that to figure out your own profile. Maybe something you can do is figure out, okay, how would I match, if I'm having a certain problem, how can I match it to my learning style to help support me? I want to talk about masking for a second. So masking, or also known as camouflaging, is a way that autistic people hide or mask their autistic traits. Sometimes if we don't have the accommodations we need, or if we're not in that safe environment, if we're not in an environment that makes us feel comfortable, sometimes people have the feel the need to mask or hide their autism. And over time, this can be really harmful to autistic people. It increases stress and anxiety, which can have other effects over time. And so, although, you're sort of just like, quote unquote, getting through it, like you're pushing through it, really trusting your gut instinct, right? Like, is this person or group of people really a good fit for me? Are they, matching my learning style? Are they even listening to me when I say I need a different type of communication? And if we just put up with that over time, we end up, sometimes masking our autism. That can be problematic over time for us. People who have other identities from historically marginalized groups can also face extra pressure to mask due to intersectionality. So if you're autistic and Black, you might hide your autism because it might make it even harder for you to navigate society. And there is this extra stigma attached to that. And so some people just find it easier to mask their autism. And that's understandable. It definitely takes a toll on the body and mind over time. So some examples of masking, just so we're all aware, mimicking social cues, right? So some people are actually really good at this. Small talk is something that is just a fact of life. Mimicking small talk, I think this is different depending on who you are. Mimicking talking about the weather can be mimicking social cues, but maybe not masking would be like small talk about something that you like, taking control of the conversation and making small talk about one of your interests. That would be a way of sort of not masking per se, but still making that small talk. You don't have to always talk about the weather. Forced eye contact can also be problematic. So if people kind of expect us to make eye contact, that's one thing. If they like make us do it, look me in the eyes kind of thing, that can be problematic. Being around people who want you to do that can definitely take a toll. But then it can actually cause physical pain to some people. So it's good to not look people in the eye if you don't want to. Fidgeting, so suppressing those types of behaviors. So if you need to like flap or if you need to fidget, but you don't feel like you can, that's called masking. So suppressing those behaviors. And then also just hiding sensory discomfort. So if you're in a loud space and you are trying to hide the fact that you are feeling uncomfortable with the sensory atmosphere, don't hide it. Just get yourself to, if you can, get yourself to a better place. Or that's why we have our go bag with us that has the headphones. So sometimes we can't anticipate these things happening, but we can always plan with certain items that we have. At the end of the day, the stimming is something that our body does. There's a typo, but helps the body self-regulate. And it really helps us fill the gap between the sensory environment and our needs, right? So if there's a mismatch, stimming can help fill the gap, and masking can do some damage if we're not able to fill that gap. We also know that there's probably more autistic people out there that are, not diagnosed. And I just wanted to take a moment to talk about Donald Triplett. Donald Triplett was the first person to be diagnosed with autism in the United States. His mom and dad, were given the option to institutionalize him back in the early 1900s, and they chose not to. And Donald ended up living a very happy, healthy life up until last year. He passed away, but he lived in Mississippi and was surrounded by a bunch of people who, really cared for him, understood him, and he had a whole community. And I think that goes a long way to say how autistic people can flourish when we have that supportive community, but also the idea that a lot of people, either were diagnosed and put into institutions or not diagnosed for some other reason. And there's lots of people in Donald's generation who worked on radios, like transistor radios, or they were tinkering with cars or something. That was just seen as like a hobby. But if you think of it, in the context of autism, it could have been a quote unquote special interest, or that person could have been on the spectrum. So I think that needs a lot more research about the numbers and percentages of adults on the spectrum, and there's a high chance that there's a lot of people who just weren't diagnosed. I'll just mention quickly the role of masking. So a lot of people over time probably masked their autism in order to fit in, and that could be also why they didn't get diagnosed. Okay. We'll talk about universal design. UDL, universal design, really, honestly, my favorite thing to talk about, because when we make things possible for neurodivergent people, we just make things plain better for everybody else. And that's when we talk about these communication styles, right? Are you changing your communication style to be more direct because it's better for autistic people, or is it just a better way to communicate? When you're talking about deadlines or expectations, do you want to be more passive when you're expecting something from someone, or do you want to be direct and clear and concise? Universal design can include things like user-friendly, right? So when we're looking at products, something that's user-friendly, something that's intuitive, something that's inclusive and flexible in terms of sizing, in terms of modes, brightness, all that stuff. Some stuff that's not intuitive, right, can be hard to kind of figure out, might not be accessible. And so you might be not able to use that product. And like I said earlier, autistic people have a right to be in the community. And so organizations, companies, entities should be designing things with neurodiversity in mind so that they can include as many people as possible. So it makes things better for everybody else, but it also improves the overall culture. And we see this in the workplace around productivity and happiness. I think a really good thing when using universal design principles is asking neurodivergent people, asking autistic people what they think about certain design. People on the spectrum should be involved in the designing and planning of initiatives, of programs, of really all levels of decision making, to ensure that these things are accessible and high quality for all. So I think we're coming down to almost the end here. Thinking about self-advocacy as self-love, I think, has been really transformational for me. It's important to advocate for what we need, right? When we're going out into the community, when we're meeting new people, but I think it's also important to know what we need, take stock of our sensory profile, of our learning styles, communication styles, what sorts of needs do we have when it comes to executive functioning. And this will help us stay connected to our community. At the end of the day, when we are connected to people in our community, we generally feel happier, and isn't that the goal? So just to wrap up here, a few takeaways. Everyone interacts and processes the world in a different way, right? This is neurodiversity, diversity of the mind. There are things that we can do to put ourselves in situations that are good for us. Doing some of that planning beforehand, doing some of that work of communicating with the people about expectations of, what you're going to do. Is that thing good for your brain and your processing? And at the end of the day, it's about, self-love, knowing yourself well enough to advocate for your needs. I think that's really impactful. And I thought a lot about sort of how this is all connected when I was making this presentation. I thought the audience would find it useful. So with that, we'll stop sharing and take questions for the audience.
Thanks, Steven. Anybody, you want them to still put in the chat, or we've got a small group? You wanna?
Yeah, you can maybe raise a hand and we'll call on you.
Okay. I think you're on mute, Katie. I know.
Oh, hello.
Hey,
That was a great presentation, Stephen. Thank you. So I have sort of a question and a story. I'm curious. So when you have a friend and their neurodivergent challenges work for a while with you, and you're able to maneuver a friendship for, like, let's say a year, 2 years, 10 years, and then all of a sudden, for whatever reason, life happens and one person gets depressed and acts not as good as they would want to, and there's no forgiveness, and that friendship falls apart. How, I mean, this is for neurotypical and neurodiverse. How do you think the best ways to heal from these, if they're not able to work out the friendships? How do you figure out what's a toxic friendship? How do you figure out what's worth trying again, or leaving it alone for a year and then trying again? I was just curious. I mean, I think this is like the human condition. I'm sure you don't have a like a miracle answer, but in your own life, how have you maneuvered? Because it's so hard to walk away from a friendship, especially if you don't have a lot of friends.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. That's a good question. I thought about this question in a lot of general ways. I think you're right. It's not specific to autistic people or neurodivergent people. But sometimes, when you're friends with neurodivergent people, your needs can conflict, right? And so that can be worth a conversation or two. I think it's just a good idea to be honest and open about where you're coming from, not you in general, but like the person, where the person's coming from, where you're coming from, like sort of, saying, like, using I statements, how it made you feel. Is the person willing to take responsibility? Do they have this self-awareness to know, what's going on with them, right? How well do they know themselves? How well do you know them? Do you know yourself? So it's, openness, honesty, and then the also the honesty to know that, if they're not willing to take accountability, or, if they're just in a rough place right now, maybe it's not the time or a good idea to keep the friendship going. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. And I know this is all very like conditional on that experience, but yeah, I think it's a great answer. And if nobody else has another question, I did have another thought. When you talk to people who are neurodiverse, and they want to expand their friendship group, what kinds of things do you tell them?
That's also a good question. So that we'll actually get into that next time when we go on part 4 about getting into the community, getting community integration. But expanding your social circle, I've done a couple things like on Meetup, gone on there before. That's been pretty good. It can be a bit hit or miss, right? It's a little bit random with who you are meeting. But I think interest groups, like so finding groups that match your interests, whether it's sports. Um, I think sometimes we tend to have a drinking culture in this country, and so if you're not a drinker, it can be a little challenging to find some of that. So if you like sports but you don't like to drink, it's a little tough because a lot of sports and drinking are kind of combined. So you'll have to get creative there, but there's a lot of groups based on interests. I think also I would say too, one thing I didn't say in the presentation, but a lot of people are in the same situation as you are. I think maybe we said this in part 1. We're kind of all in this boat together, and we're experiencing the world together. And I think a lot of people have this thought that they're the only ones that are experiencing isolation or feel lonely, and it's totally not the case. There's a lot of people who are in the same boat, and I think we can figure out ways to kind of get sort of social circles up and running, but you're certainly not alone.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Stephen, do you want to share about some of the, I mean, I'm assuming most people are local, but groups like DC Peers or anything like that. And we do also have a list, a running list that we can share, but do you have a few favorites that you like to share? And I'll try to put links in the chat.
Yeah, in terms of disability friendly organizations, DC Peers is an organization that works with teens, young adults, and older adults in terms of social outings. They also have support groups. There's also PCR, Potomac Community Resources, and UCR, Up County Community Resources. They run social outings for neurodivergent adults, and also have activity groups based on various interests. So those are the ones in the area. And then, of course, with parents of autistic people, I know X Minds does a lot with that. And so finding support groups, for people going through your experience can be good. In terms of activities, not so much disability centered, but there is DC Fray has sports leagues, Volo Sports, and so it's Volo and then Zog Sports. They have sports leagues from around the DC area, and that's a really great way to actually meet people who are pretty friendly while doing sports. Not all of them are super competitive, so you can choose to sort of be active at your own rate. But there are people who are doing that, looking for friends, and I think it's a really good opportunity.
I'm gonna put people in the go here in a minute. I know they've added a lot of different some in person and some virtual. So let me make sure I get them. And I think I missed Up County. I'll get that one too.
Eric, do you have a question?
Yeah, hi. Have you all ever heard of a group called Autistic Association of Greater Washington, or AAGW?
No, that's new to me.
Yes,
Uh,
we have that one. We can add that in there. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, I'm on their Zoom group. I think
Good.
it's twice a month, yeah.
Thank you. I'm gonna add that one in here. I'm looking for people on the go.
Yeah,
What is
that's
that, Eric? What is that one like? If you could tell us a little bit about it.
It's a discussion group. It's not really very formal. Sometimes they have discussion topics. Mostly it's a very friendly group. Yeah. And like I said, it's every 2 weeks, right?
great.
I'd like to add Spirit Club. I'm a big fan of them. That's a neurodiverse gym.
That's a good one too, Katie. Thanks.
Yeah, and for people who like music, there's a wonderful neurodiverse music school that has bands called Groove. If anyone's ever seen a neurodiversity band, they learned how to play there.
Tell
And
me again what it's called. Groove.
Groove Music
Groove.
School.
Okay, and we'll share this list too when we send out the link. Thanks for all these. That's good. Always good to have new ones. I don't know that one. Groove Music School.
Yeah, they have an adult band, and you can take music classes there
Okay.
and learn anything you want.
Oh, fun. I love it. I love Spirit Club. And we have an adult social group. I know some of you who are on tonight are part of that. It meets twice a month, once in person. They just had a Halloween potluck and then once virtually. So and you don't have to, it meets in Howard County in person, but we also have some meetups in Montgomery County. So let me get it.
There's
So
all oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
go ahead, that's fine.
I was just going to say that I'm sure a lot of people here know about Main Street.
Thank you.
You don't have to live there to go to their events. They just had a really fabulous author speak. I think is Eric's hand up. Is that new, Eric, or is that old?
No, I was going to mention going to Main Street in Rockville is fun. Just over the spring, I got into membership at Main Street. I did one event with them so far, and I've been very busy though, so haven't gotten too far into the organization.
Yeah, it's great. And even if you go, and I went and I work out once in a while with a friend there, and it's so fun. Even if you just hang out in the lobby, there's always someone to talk to. So yeah, it's a great place.
Add that one too. Thank you. The Baltimore Chesapeake Autism Society also has an adult group that meets. I will add that, I think, on Thursdays. And I'll put them in here too.
Well, while you're adding, I'll add also Bender JCC, the Bender Jewish Community Center
Okay.
in Rockville just started having classes for adults. And I've been really impressed with their new inclusion director.
Nice.
Always adding things, and you don't have to be Jewish to go. And
Okay.
I've heard that the DC JCC always has had a really robust program, but I haven't gone. And I don't know if there's anyone here in Virginia, but I've the Virginia JCC also. And you don't have to be Jewish to do any of these things.
Good. Okay. Here's JCC. Thank you. Well, that's a good selection. So again, I'll throw these in a list and so we can so is that for the Bender special needs? Is that the one? And inclusion, you said the inclusion director. I wanted to get the right thing.
Yeah, so the inclusion director has classes, like she has like something called Friendship 101, and she has
Okay.
Reality 101. She has classes. They also started a inclusive soccer league on Sundays from 10 to 11.
Wow, I had no idea. That's great. That's
Yeah.
right on there. Okay.
And actually, now that we're talking about that, there's something called Open Door Sports, which is phenomenal. They have both high school and They have all ages, but they just started an adult basketball league. And I'm sure most people here know about Special Olympics. I know a lot of people have made good friends there too.
Yeah. Response. Cool. This is great. Thank you.
Oh, somebody asked about Anne Arundel County-based activities.
Anne Arundel County, there are, well, Parks and Recs we work with a little bit, and they have some activities. And also I find that the city of Annapolis has had a lot of sensory friendly activities and stuff. And I'm not as familiar with their adult programs, but they seem to be very, I'm gonna look at that one and add it to the list if that one works.
I had one last question for Steven too.
Yes.
I'm always looking for good assessments. I'm a social worker too, just like Steven, but I didn't study this in school. I studied geriatrics, and I was curious if, I know you've studied a lot about neurodiversity, and I'm curious if you know good assessments, both for learning styles and for career work, and not just paid work, but volunteer work, like ways to kind of assess what would be really great for people.
Yeah, we'll have to get back to you on that one. I'm not familiar with any
Yeah.
official assessments. I mean, maybe you can
It's
go
very
on.
specialized, I know.
Yeah, you could probably go online and take a test, but I mean, it's not BuzzFeed, and I don't know the fidelity of it, so I can't put
We
my.
have a couple, it's more for though, kind of figuring out interests and, as you head to college, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I know that Suzanne has a list. If you contact us at the office, we can get that for you.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
It'd be something on there that would work.
Yeah, because I mean, I didn't realize this, but
Oh, there she is. She's on there.
yeah, abilities, potentials, aptitude testing.
She's on the list. Yeah, she's got that.
Well, and I know that not all assessments are equal. Like there's,
Okay.
I've been told that there's good and bad testing places. So yeah, to go. Thanks.
I think we have some personal experience at this one though. So anyway, reach out to Suzanne at our office and she can guide you on that. That's good. Okay, guys. Steven, thank you again so much. This is great conversation, and I'm always glad to learn about new resources that we can all share and new ideas that Steven has to share with all of us. So our next session is, when is it? Do we have a date, Suzanne? January? I should know. I apologize, but we will get that out to you. 14th. Thank you. So that will be session 4, and the other 2 sessions and this one have been recorded. This one will also be recorded and put on our website. And so if you missed the first 2, you can go back. I'm gonna make sure that we send that link too, so you can find the we have a webinar library, and there's all kinds of well, there are these sessions and also other sessions that are geared towards self-advocates. So you might find interesting. So I'll send that link as well. So thank you so much, Steven. And thank you everybody for being here. And we look forward to seeing you back in January.